Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that many of the decisions you've made in your life were not really yours. Not because someone forced you, not because you were lazy or careless, but because your mind quietly nudged you in certain directions without ever asking for permission. Today's video is not about listing psychological concepts or memorizing clever definitions. This is an audio-only deep dive into how invisible thinking errors quietly sabotage smart people, ambitious people, and well-intentioned people every single day. This is an ultimate guide for anyone who believes they are rational, independent, and objective, and wants to stay that way. By the end of this video, you won't just recognize cognitive biases, you'll understand how they shape your identity, your confidence, your career, and even your sense of reality. Most discussions about cognitive biases focus on naming them, as if awareness alone magically fixes the problem. But the real damage doesn't come from not knowing their names. It comes from how these biases reinforce each other, lock you into patterns, and convince you that you are thinking clearly when you are not. So instead of jumping from bias to bias like a checklist, we're going to explore a single powerful idea: how your brain builds false certainty. Almost every bias you've heard about feeds into this illusion of certainty, and once you see that pattern, you start catching your own thinking in real time. Let's start with the moment certainty is born. The human brain hates uncertainty. From an evolutionary perspective, hesitation was dangerous. So when the brain encounters new information, it grabs on to the first solid thing it can find and treats it like a foundation. This is where anchoring quietly enters your life. The first number, opinion, or explanation you hear becomes the reference point for everything that follows. Even when you think you've moved on, your brain is still orbiting that initial anchor. What makes this dangerous is not that anchors exist, but that they feel invisible. You genuinely believe you are evaluating things fresh, when in reality, you are adjusting slightly around a starting point you never chose consciously. Now here's where the illusion deepens. Once an anchor is in place, your brain begins to look for information that feels relevant, vivid, and emotionally charged. This is where availability takes over. The mind doesn't ask, is this statistically important? It asks, can I easily recall an example? News stories, personal anecdotes, and dramatic events flood your judgment, while boring but critical data gets ignored. This creates a world where rare dangers feel massive and common risks feel small. Over time, this doesn't just distort your fear. It distorts your priorities, your politics, your spending, and your sense of what matters. At this point, you might think, at least I decide for myself. But the brain is social before it is logical. Once uncertainty creeps in, the mind looks sideways to see what others are doing. This is how the bandwagon effect quietly masquerades as independent thinking. When many people believe something, your brain treats that belief as social proof of correctness. Agreeing feels safe. Disagreeing feels risky. Over time, this trains you to mistake popularity for truth. You stop asking, is this right? And start asking, how many people believe this? The scariest part is that this happens even when you pride yourself on being contrarian. Now let's add another layer. Once you make a choice, any choice, your brain immediately starts protecting it. This is not confidence. This is self-defense. Choice-supportive thinking rewrites the past so that your decision appears wiser than it was. Flaws become minor. Alternatives become worse. This protects your self-image, but it comes at a cost. You lose the ability to learn from mistakes. When identity gets attached to decisions, feedback becomes a threat instead of information. This is why people double down on bad investments, bad relationships, and bad beliefs long after evidence says it's time to let go. This naturally leads to confirmation. Once your brain has committed to a view, it doesn't search for truth. It searches for reassurance. Information that agrees with you feels intelligent. Information that challenges you feels suspicious. Over time, your media diet, conversations, and even search habits narrow into an echo chamber that feels like clarity, but is actually insulation. This is one of the most dangerous traps because it rewards you emotionally for being wrong in the same way it rewards you for being right. You feel smart, informed, and justified even as your understanding shrinks. When evidence becomes too uncomfortable to ignore, the brain has one last defense. It looks away. Ostrich-style thinking isn't always conscious denial. Often, it's quiet avoidance. You postpone checking results. You delay difficult conversations. You convince yourself that problems will resolve on their own. This creates short-term emotional relief at the cost of long-term damage. What makes this especially destructive is that ignoring a problem often feels like optimism when it is actually fear in disguise. Now let's talk about outcomes. Humans love results. We judge decisions by how they turn out, not by how they were made. Outcome-based thinking teaches you the wrong lessons. A bad decision that works out looks brilliant. A good decision that fails looks foolish. Over time, this trains you to trust luck and punish reasoning. You start chasing wins instead of improving judgment. This is how people become confident in methods that should never be repeated, simply because they once worked by chance. That confidence feeds directly into overconfidence. Past success becomes proof of personal superiority. You stop questioning assumptions. You rely more on intuition and less on evidence. The irony is that overconfidence often feels like mastery. When it is actually the moment, learning stops. The brain confuses familiarity with accuracy. This is why intelligent people are often more vulnerable than average ones. Their past success gives them convincing reasons to stop checking themselves. Then, there's belief itself. When you expect something to work, your behavior subtly changes to make it more likely to succeed. This is the placebo effect, and it's not just about medicine. Expectations shape effort, persistence, and perception. Used consciously, belief can be a powerful tool. Used blindly, it becomes a trap. The reverse is equally dangerous. Negative expectations quietly sabotage performance, health, and motivation. The mind becomes both the engine and the brake. Survivorship thinking completes the illusion. You look at the winners and assume their traits cause their success, ignoring the countless unseen failures who did the same things. This creates false formulas for achievement and false narratives about talent, discipline, and luck. You end up copying visible habits instead of understanding invisible variables. This doesn't just mislead individuals. It shapes entire industries of advice built on incomplete stories. Selective perception then filters your reality itself. You literally notice what aligns with your identity and overlook what doesn't. The world you experience becomes a customized version of reality that feels objective but isn't. This happens below awareness, which makes it especially powerful. Two people can experience the same situation and walk away with completely different conclusions, each convinced they saw things clearly. Finally, all of this is sealed by the most ironic bias of all, the belief that you are less biased than others. The blind spot doesn't feel like arrogance. It feels like reasonableness. You acknowledge that biases exist, just not strongly in you. This belief prevents correction. It turns self-reflection into performance rather than practice. The moment you believe you are objective is often the moment you stop being so. So what is the real takeaway? Cognitive biases are not random glitches. They are a system. They work together to create certainty, protect identity, reduce discomfort, and conserve mental energy. The goal is not to eliminate them. That's impossible. The goal is to slow them down, to create pauses where questioning is allowed, to replace certainty with curiosity, to treat beliefs as temporary tools rather than permanent truths. If you can walk away from this video with one habit, let it be this. When something feels obvious, ask why. When something feels popular, ask whether it's correct. When something feels personal, ask whether identity is involved. This is not about becoming skeptical of everything. It's about becoming humble in the face of how powerful your own mind really is. If you stay with this mindset, you don't just avoid thinking errors. You build a quieter confidence, one that doesn't need to be defended. And that kind of confidence is rare, durable, and transformative.